Dreads! What's good, everybody? It's Coach Phil Reacts, and I am back with another video. So, Calgary Stampeder Classics, man. Shout out to you, brother. He uploaded a little segment docu-series talking about the unknown history of John Candy and the CFL's ill-fated expansion into the U.S. Now, there's been a lot of debate I've seen on Twitter, X, whatever the fuck Elon Musk is calling it nowadays. I don't really give a shit. About the CFL expansion in the mid-90s, and was it a failure? Was it a success? I want to make my own opinion. I've done a lot of research on it. I've tried to understand and grasp the idea of what they were trying to do. And as we can obviously all see, the CFL is still around, but was it more of a stopgap or was it a means to an end? In my humble opinion, because there was a lot of teams that played in the West, down in the CFL South at the time of what it was. You had the Sacramento Gold Miners, you had the Las Vegas Posse. That is a funny story in itself. The San Antonio Texans. You also had the Baltimore Stallions. You had the Birmingham Barracudas. There were a lot of teams, man. The Shreveport Pirates. The list goes on, but I want to take a look at this one, man, and hopefully you all enjoy this one and we all learn a little bit more. And yeah, so if this is your first time to the channel, run over there, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all that jazz. And without any further ado, let's learn about the CFL expansion.
Up on the board for
all right, here we go.
On the screen, the question about favoring expansion into the United States. Would it benefit the Canadian Football League? Can this league survive without expanding into the United States? Is it dead in a year or two if it doesn't?
If you earn, okay, $100 a week, but you spent $200 a week, you're going to be bankrupt.
There's 4 new owners because there was 4 bankrupt teams.
The American team is here to stay.
But I don't want to take the C out of the Canadian Football League, and that's hogwash.
The era of CFL expansion into the United States didn't last very long.
American expansion's been a disaster with the exception of Baltimore. Now that means either conceptually it was a bad idea or you didn't carry it off properly. Which was the case?
Wow.
Some of it was very good.
But this has been a very satisfying season for the Baltimore Stallions. They celebrate as Grey Cup champions of 1995.
Some of it very bad. But was it necessary? And is the CFL still around today because of it?
We have to be different. We have to try and expand and export an outstanding, unique Canadian game.
Those are some of the questions we're going to try
Scott
to answer
Oak.
by talking to people who not only
Dave.
cover the league, but the people on the inside.
Great book, by the
Let's
way.
take a deep dive into that period
Bruce
of CFL
McNaught. Oh my
expansion
God, there's some heavy
into
hitters.
the United States. The early 90s in the CFL was just a crazy time. Financially, the league was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Teams were surviving on a game-by-game basis, and players weren't even sure if their checks were going to cash. And it didn't help that they saw a reduction in their
Dave
TV
Sapunges.
coming in. In short, they were broke.
You know that when you hear like a shark, it has to keep swimming or it dies, right? The CFL was kind of like the shark. It had to keep swimming.
And it looked like the CFL was kind of being left behind. The situation was that dire.
I think the mood of the time was the CFL was
Move over there.
Dying.
The Ottawa Rough Riders went bankrupt about 4 weeks after the start of the 1991 season.
Gee, I wonder who talked about that a few weeks ago. I told y'all we was gonna get into this at some point. The whole was means to an end with the Ottawa Rough Riders video.
The now mighty Saskatchewan Rough Riders were not mighty back in the early 90s. They were not that far removed from having to hold telethons to raise enough money to pay their bills.
Well, damn.
No team could ever afford to lose, but 4 had to every week. The theme was, oh boy, if they lose this game, the fans aren't coming for the next game, and this franchise is going to be done.
How do you grow new revenues for the Canadian Football League? And that is the challenge today. And that was the challenge 30 years ago.
The league needed something. They got the McNall group. The McNall-Gretzky Candy group came in '91, which was a big burst of positive publicity for the league.
Was it ever? For many around the league, the new ownership group was that light at the end of the tunnel they were looking for. You have 2 of the most famous Canadian...
Okay. This picture right here. I love this picture. First of all, it's John Candy. R.I.P. John Candy. But And you got the great one, Wayne Gretzky, and, you know, Bruce McNall. For all the shit that people talk about Bruce McNall did produce a Grey Cup for Toronto. Him and his, you know, with John Candy and Wayne Gretzky. But also Bruce McNall did what he did with LA Knights. He had great intentions. He just fucked it up by the way he was getting his paper. But who wasn't doing shit like that? Art Modell was doing shit like that, and he got a whole new franchise and moved to Baltimore. So I don't want to sit there and just say, oh, the people say, oh, he's a fraud. Bruce McNall is a fraud. But did they know that Bruce was a fraud? Or did they just take the money and be like, hey, we don't care where it comes from. You got it. We gonna take it.
Canadians, alongside a businessman best known for pulling off one of the biggest trades in sports history when he brought Wayne Gretzky to the LA Kings. He was also known for going to jail for defrauding
LA Kings. My fault. I meant Kings. Did I say Kings? Okay, whatever.
Bruce
Scratch
McNall
that.
knew a thing or two about how to make a product cool and, more importantly, profitable again. And now he was looking to do that with an entire league. A league he invested in, by the way, because, well, his buddies told him to.
When we first bought the team, I did not have any clue to anything. And I said, well, what are the arguments? It's a football team in Canada. I said, oh, really? And so then I asked Gretzky. I said, did you ever hear the arguments? Oh, yeah, I was a big fan. You know, Toronto was a big deal to us, and I was a fan of them. I said, oh, really? I asked John Candy the same thing. Huge fan. So we ended up buying a team.
But it wasn't just the name of the team that McNall didn't know.
And I really hadn't done a whole lot of research and background on the league itself until we got into it. And then realized that, yeah, there's some issues around the league.
So Bruce pretty much just had money to blow, and he was just trying to, and he just took it on a whim. That's how you know you got way too much money, when you just frivolously, all right, take 5-6 mil right here. Oh, take 2 mil right here. Sometimes having too much money, I'll put it like this. When I was a kid, I loved the Bearstein Bears, and they had a book. It was called Too Much Junk, where you saw on the cover, if you ever read the Bearstein Bears, and yes, I said Bearstain, that there was just junk food and TV, and they watched too much TV, they ate too much junk food, they did play too many games and all that. Like, sometimes having too much money can be a hindrance to you. And in Bruce's case, it was like a double-edged sword. I kind of already know about Bruce's situation, like what he was doing, but hey, could you really fault the CFL for letting him come in there and buy the Argos? Or is Bruce just off a whim, just threw the money in there and they got success quickly? And then, as we know, it fizzled out fast. So,
And so the idea was to try to shore up the ownership so that they had people that were more viable, as well as getting a television deal that made more sense. And the next step was maybe we could expand to the United States.
And they needed those expansion checks. That at the time of expansion seemed like it was their best, if not their only option.
And the idea was, let's see if we can bring in some new markets, some new interest, get some American TV money. And that was
okay, these were the original places. So you had the Pacific, which was Vancouver, which, okay, it wasn't BC. Okay, so this was to be the Pacific Division, Central Division, the Eastern Division. All right, so we got Vancouver, Sacramento, Portland, Calgary. Okay. Central, Winnipeg, San Antonio, Saskatchewan, Edmonton. That's a nice division right there, especially at that time. Not bad. Eastern, Montreal, Ottawa, Scambleton, and Toronto. I guess you could say, because Montreal was Montreal gone at that time? I think Montreal was already gone, but they were going to bring it back. So I'm looking at the Central as a scary division right there.
That was the real pot of gold that never surfaced.
There's a market of 300 million people who love football, and there's a time of year where they don't have football, and there's markets where people are willing to write checks right now for teams. That's how we got on the road to U.S. expansion.
Enter Larry Smith. On the surface, he was a football guy. Drafted first overall in 1972, he played 9 seasons in the league, winning 2 Grey Cups. But make no mistake, he was not hired to be a commissioner in the traditional sense.
I think Larry Smith was hired to execute this. It was not Larry Smith's idea.
A man with an impossible mission: expand us into the U.S., grow our revenue, fix our problems.
He was hired to grow the league in any way possible. And expansion was certainly one, maybe the most important.
And he had so many problems. It was like a guy trying to put a finger into the dike, and then he's trying to put another finger into another hole somewhere else.
I can go yin and yang on Larry Smith, okay? Because, again, he was hired to do a job. And it was a hard job.
Yeah.
It was a job at the point of a gun. Like, we need to do this now. But I think there were times where Larry could not admit that something wasn't working.
Oh.
Or wasn't living up to their expectations. And he tried to paint the pig for the media too many times.
But I would ask some of these people that have come out of the closet and complained about our expansion, what have you done lately? Have you gone to a football game? Have you supported Canadian university football?
He did treat journalists with a fair bit of disdain. Which is never a smart thing to do. You don't insult somebody who buys ink by the barrel, is the old joke.
I think some of the press were over anxious to try to create a story. Maybe they didn't have anything to write about.
I also have some degree of empathy for the fact he had an extraordinarily difficult job to do.
Honestly, I think Larry Smith should go down in history as somebody who really helped keep the league alive at a time when it very well could have gone out of business.
So, right off the bat, I can already tell you right now, I like Larry Smith. I do. I like the. Sometimes you need a guy in business that's not going to give the media the cliche answers what they want to hear. I like that Larry stood on business and was like, look, what have you done? Have you gone out there and supported the CFL? Have you gone out there and supported your Canadian universities? Have you gone and supported their sports? Because I know there was a couple schools that gave up their teams because they couldn't afford to keep the facilities and keep the upkeep of the team and all that. Like, it's tough. And knowing now what I know, the luxury of like U Sports and OSWA, all OUAA and all that, the different leagues for university players, it's at that time, man, it was sparse. So for Larry to sit there and stand on business and say, hey, what have you done? It's easy for you to criticize from the outside, but yeah, I respect it. Now, is he a little curt? Is he a little? You gotta be sometimes. You gotta be a little curt with people when they're disrespecting your product. If you believe in something strongly and you want to see it be successful, you're gonna stand on it and be like, "Hey, I'm gonna go with it till the wheels fall off." Now, I do like what Dave said. He was in a kind of like in a lose-lose situation. Like, if it succeeds, he's not probably gonna get the credit for it. But if it fails, he's going to get all the blame. The LeBron theory that I like to say. LeBron wins. The team wins. LeBron did it. Team loses. It's the teammate's fault. So, hey, do your job, homie.
So Bruce McNall pushed for it. Larry Smith was put in charge of it. But you may be surprised at who was one of the most, if not the most, important figures in the CFL expanding into the United States. John Candy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Uncle Buck.
He was 90% of it, I would say. I mean, he was it. I mean, yes, there are other people involved. I was involved, Larry Smith, other people. But, he was the leader.
And eventually, with expansion and the things we're going to be doing, we'll make it work.
A colorful but very influential figure in the operation of the CFL because, he had a lot of money in the Argonauts.
He had his soul. Some people had their money in the CFL. Some people had their money and their soul in the CFL. John Candy had his soul in it.
I guaranteed him not to have to put up more money.
I like that he just said that. Some people have their money in the CFL. John Candy had his money and his soul. Man. Take that in for a second. I will say it again. Some people have their money in the CFL. John Candy had his money and soul in the CFL. I'm gonna let that marinate for a second, y'all, because that man, whew, that's a bar.
That he did, so that when Wayne and I are covering losses that came about, but by the time the second year was around, and then later on, John never had to put up another nickel. So he couldn't care less about the economics of it all. He was all a fan.
Yeah, he was the chair of the CFL's expansion committee. He completely embraced the concept. John had interestingly, he'd started off his career in Toronto with Second City and SCTV, and then he'd become a major Hollywood star. So he personally experienced the idea of going from a big
Plays,
fish
trays,
in a
and
pretty small
automobiles.
market to a big fish in a global market.
He would go into a city 3 or 4 days before the Argos played there and do free publicity. Like, can you imagine what it would cost the CFL to get, movie star his status to go in and do publicity for a football game?
Why? What's it to you?
He was just doing that.
What else you want?
I mean, he literally stopped his acting career. I mean, he didn't do anything in those years because he was so dedicated to the CFL.
He grabbed onto expansion as an idea that might become the salvation for the league, and who better to sell it than John Candy, one of the most popular, attractive humans on the planet, right?
CFL.
It's still Canadian Football League.
CFL.
Continental Football.
CFL. That's the brand. NFL is their brand. Our brand is CFL.
Talk your shit, Larry. Talk yo. Wherever Larry Smith is right now, y'all put it out there to him and say, hey, Coach Phil, hey, I like you, Larry. I hope you're still alive and you get a chance to see this. I'm going to give you your flowers, dog. Just off of that, sir, CFL. And dude kept pressing, say, Continental? No, CFL, Canadian. And that's the beauty of the game. That is the absolute beauty of the Canadian Football League, man. And just Canadian football, it's in the US, we already got enough shit. Embrace something on the outside, man, and you will find that there's more over the border, across the border than what we do. And we don't always have to, and from an American perspective, I understand why, because we want to be comfortable, because we're scared. The propaganda and this is what we see about Canada. To be honest with you, the most I knew about Canada growing up was Terrence and Phillip from South Park, and I ain't ashamed to admit that. Like that was me, and I was ignorant. I was ignorant as a kid. But as I got older and learned to appreciate Canada, and now going on and being on my CFL journey, you understand the beauty of the game and why change it to make it for people that are not going to fully appreciate it at times. You understand what I'm saying? You don't have to Americanize every damn thing. This is from an American. I'm just saying. So, hey, Larry Smith, hats off to you, sir.
I know a lot of Canadians are like, there's that.
So that first season, 1991, ended up having just one team south of the border, the Sacramento Gold Miners, who would later move to San Antonio. But over the next 2 seasons, 5 more teams would join. The Shreveport Pirates, the Las Vegas Posse, the Memphis Mad Dogs, the Birmingham Barracudas, and the Baltimore... Well, that part's a bit tricky. You see, the original plan was to call them the Colts to appease all of those angry NFL fans that lost their team in 1983 to relocation. The NFL went to the courts to block the team using the name. And just hours before their first game in the CFL, a judge ruled they couldn't be referred to as the Colts.
We acknowledge from the outset that we're under a court injunction to resist all temptation to refer to Baltimore as spirited young horses of any kind, and until the matter is straightened out in the American court system, we'll try to comply, but forgive us if we slip up occasionally.
The Baltimore Colts, then the Baltimore CFL Colts, then the Baltimore CFLers, then the Baltimore Stallions. Yeah, it did not help the league's image to have that kind of stuff going on.
It's the Baltimore No Names.
Obviously, we want the Colts name. I wasn't supposed to say that, was it?
This is the craziest part of all this. I watched the CBC little docu thing. It's like a one-horse town, and the owner basically did it to drum up media for the team, which was a smart move. So if they don't mention that part, then I think you're leaving out the context of it. Dude was smart for that, but at the same time, you wasted money trying to fight the NFL, which is, we all know the NFL don't want nothing. NFL don't give, the NFL takes. You understand? So, short-sighted, take a loss early on, yes. But the product on the field, outstanding.
But whatever you called them, all of these years later, there is one thing that is beyond debate. They were the most successful American franchise in CFL history.
Don
Back-to-back
Matthews.
Grey Cup appearances, one championship, and one of the all-time greatest teams.
Grey Cup champions of 1995.
Every U.S. expansion team, except the Baltimore Stallions, hired a former NFL or USFL coach.
Some guys came up here and they just thought, okay, well, it's just the same as American football, except
nope.
you pretend you're starting on second down because you've only got 3 down. So it's 2nd and 10 when you get the football. Well, that's just a backwards, stupid way of looking at it.
That was a bad idea. Like, it's, different game, we know, right? And they weren't even, it wasn't like you just hired a USFL or XFL coach and the rest of your staff was experienced CFL guys. There were some experienced CFL guys on staff sprinkled in, but by and large, these were staffs that had almost no CFL experience, and the exception was Baltimore.
Don Matthews was one of the best coaches that Canadian football had ever seen. He'd been part of the Edmonton dynasty in the late 70s and early 80s. He'd won a Grey Cup as head coach with the BC Lions. He knew Canadian football inside out. The Baltimore team figured out how to stock themselves with tremendously good talent, including all kinds of players who played in the Canadian Football League before. And so that All-American lineup became a dominant force, and they won the Grey Cup, the only one that left the country.
And by the way, they were making money doing it. But over in Las Vegas...
Oh, Canada, our home and native land.
I recall it well. It was one of the highlights of American expansion.
I remember watching it and thinking, oh my God, what is going on? That was so awful.
Don't remember it. I probably purposely lost it in my head.
Yes, I was there. It was 1,000,000 degrees. There's 12,000 people there. And I was working for CBC Radio and had one of those old school tape recorders. And when he started to get 2 bars into it, I was like, where's my tape recorder, right? And I'm scrambling for it. And, which I'm not used to doing during the anthem.
Far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
He sung it to the tune of "Oh Christmas Tree," so it came out. I get to it, but it came out kind of like "Oh Canada, oh Canada."
Far and wide, oh Canada.
And they invited him to Hamilton the next week to get it right, by the way.
And they did it up big. They brought him out in a limo, and I remember him getting out of the limo and singing the anthem. And he got through it this time, and I guess you could say it was close to how "O Canada" should be sung, but it still wasn't great.
Our home and native land.
However, I do remember interviewing him after he had done it.
I had forgotten about the Scott Oak thing, or I maybe didn't watch that game and didn't know it. That's absolutely hilarious. I hope you've got that footage.
I want you to meet the happiest man in the world, Dennis K.C. Park, skewered around North America for his performance in Vegas, so it's only fair that we give him a final word on this. How good do you feel?
I feel good. It's right there. I feel good. And I didn't know if I would, but it turned out that I do.
Trivia question, you know who sang the U.S. anthem that night? The Star Spangled
Dionne Warwick.
Dionne Warwick.
You go ahead, Queen.
Yeah, it was just a surreal moment on top of a surreal setting, I would describe it.
So yeah, the Stallions were doing well on and off the field, but the other 5 teams were not. And when you add that to the fact that the Cleveland Browns of the NFL were moving to Baltimore, while the CFL's American expansion quickly...
I forgot about the Memphis Mad Dogs too.
Look, it's the old adage. You got to give the people what they want. And did they want it in the U.S.? The answer would be no.
The last game or 2 of the posse ended up being moved to Edmonton because it was just dead in the Las Vegas market, and that's when you're dead man walking, right? When you can't even play your home games anymore. You got to go elsewhere.
I remember doing a game in the San Antonio Dome, and my God, it just felt like a cavernous, wide open place with minimal fans. It didn't look good.
So I think that was kind of the saddest thing, where it just felt like nobody cared when you watch those games. Those follow 95 games where you just felt, man, what are we doing here?
Ultimately, I would say the failure was because, for whatever early success the CFL might have had in the U.S., it fell apart when American college football started.
The cities that wanted CFL teams and the ones that got them ended up having to compete with college teams that are right in their backyard. And college, especially the South,
it's king.
Huge. It's the biggest thing. It's bigger than the NFL.
Birmingham and Memphis, those are college football markets. And when college football started, it was like, in Birmingham, you literally went from 35,000 games to 2.
In the United States, Friday night is high school football, Saturday is college football, and Sunday is NFL. That doesn't leave a lot of room for Canadian football once you get to Labor Day and those seasons all start.
But all of that being said, decades later, were there any positives that came out of the CFL's 3-year expansion into the United States?
Baltimore Stallions franchise was moved to Montreal in '96 and got resurrected.
I mean, at that time, nobody was talking about putting a team in Montreal. I mean, the Canadian Football League kind of didn't exist, even though football in Quebec was starting to thrive.
Here we are, 26 years later, they're still here and still doing well.
And the team won, like, their first 10 years. I mean, they won like a dozen games at least, right? And they arrived with a Hall of Fame quarterback in Tracy Ham, and transitioned to another one in Anthony Calvillo. And I mean, they were basically 20 years with 2 quarterbacks, which is, in any football league, is unreal.
In my view, the CFL would have been dead if it hadn't been for expansion, actually, which a lot of people don't, they think it was a huge failure. I think expansion bought the league some time, and it brought them some much needed money.
Oh yeah? There was one more.
I got 2 kids out of it. My ex-wife I met in Memphis at a Birmingham, on my way to a Birmingham Stallions at Memphis Mad Dogs game. So my kids are the byproduct of U.S. expansion, if you can believe that. And every once in a while I remind my daughter that she should be happy that there was U.S. expansion in the CFL, otherwise she would not exist.
Dave, we gotta talk. Dave, we gotta talk, man, because we got some dad stories to tell, Block. I love the honesty. I tell my son the same thing when I talk to him about, boy, Black Velvet and Hypnotic, that ruined my, hey, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Black Velvet. If you know, you know. But anyway, the devil is a lie. Let's get to the final thoughts, y'all. All right, y'all, so let's talk about the final thoughts when it comes to the unknown history of John Candy and the CFL's ill-fated expansion into the U.S. Now, the big question that I want to answer is, was it a failure? Obviously, it was a failure, but it's still here. I'll say right now, I believe it was a stopgap. It was a means to an end. They needed to do the expansion, even though the U.S. teams failed. Look at what they got out of it in the long run. They did get Montreal back they got the Alouettes back in Montreal because of Baltimore having to move, because of the Ravens coming to Baltimore and all that bullshit. But at the same time, though, you gotta understand, man. I want to say you gotta spend money to make money. I want to say you gotta take some chances, and it might not be in the long run. You gotta see it short-sighted. Yes, it was a rough patch, but would the CFL still be here if the expansion didn't happen? No. Let's just keep it real. You needed the US a little bit. You needed the US a little bit to keep the league going. Whether it was going to be successful or not, who cares at this point in time now? If they would have waited maybe till about 95, you can't even say that, because who knows what would have happened. But a lot of shoulda, woulda, coulda. It is what it is. The expansion, there was a lot of players that did come out of it that did become household names. There were guys that, I didn't know about that, are some ballers that didn't probably get the shot. I mean, look, Joe Horn went on to have a really good NFL career. I wish Matt Dunnigan wouldn't have got hurt, because he was balling. We all know how Matt Dunnigan was. He got hurt and never played again. Anthony Calvillo. Y'all love to sit there and say he's the GOAT, but his career started in Las Vegas and he moved on. Even though Las Vegas was a heaping pile of crap, but the expansion was needed. And the league is still here. So, and also as far as with John Candy, his role, you needed John Candy. RIP John Candy. Ain't nothing else you can say about that, man, but you needed John Candy as marketability and putting it out there and being a spokesperson for the league, man. Wayne is Wayne. Wayne Gretzky is Wayne Gretzky, but Wayne was in LA living it up. So John was the only one that was like, hey, yeah, I'm in it. I'm with it. So be thankful for that. But yeah, that's the CFL expansion right there. We got it done, y'all. So that's gonna be it, y'all. Comment down below what you want me to react to next. We have a live going on either on Saturday. I'm gonna do Saturday at noon. We are gonna react to the 1996 Grey Cup, the CFL games in 40 minutes. So if you got time on Saturday, hop in, check it out. Blase blah, bring some snacks. We're gonna chop it up in the chat. I want to see more people in there, so be on the lookout for that. I got 2 other videos on the way. I got a lot of deep in the game coming, and we getting ready for the season, y'all. So we ready. So we've been ready. I've been ready since the end of the Grey Cup reaction video from this past year. So I'm in rare form now. So that's it, y'all. Continue to be great, strive for greatness, all that jazz, and always remember.
Check this out.